Under the endless night sky, where the stars twinkle like the souls of forgotten ancestors, stretches a quiet village near the banks of the mighty Dnieper. The villagers whisper of a figure that appears in the foggy nights, a shadow in a tattered suit, with eyes like smoldering coals and a voice that cuts to the bones. They call him the Forgotten One and say that he is a cursed poet whose words of vengeance awaken the earth with each full moon. One evening, a young girl, Oksana, sees that shadow in a dream. In the vision, he calls her name in a voice filled with longing. Feeling a strange urge, she goes to the shore, despite the warnings of her elders. Under the cold light of the moon, Oksana hears ancient poems, forgotten lines that speak of betrayal, of love, broken by envy and cruelty. When she comes closer, she sees his face, a reflection of pain and despair, an echo of ancient times. She understands that the poet's curse doomed him to an eternal search for justice. It begins to dawn, and, looking around, Oksana sees his figure melting, leaving an old, wrinkled scroll on the ground. Since then, every night Oksana reads his poems, captured by ancient grief, and the shadow of the poet once again wanders through the village, reminding people of his presence. Song of the Forgotten. A long time ago, when the village was just being founded, there lived a young poet, Stepan, known not only for his talent, but also for his great, sincere love for the daughter of the local headman, Maria. Their love was pure, like dawn dew, but it broke the heart of one noble gentleman, to whom the old man promised Mary's hand in exchange for wealth and protection. When the gentleman found out about the relationship between Stepan and Maria, anger flared up in him. One night, he bribed the treacherous friends of the poet, who lured Stepan to a dark forest, where they beat him and left him to die. It is said that before his death, Stepan cursed the land that betrayed him and begged his heart to find the truth, even in the world of shadows. Since that time, every full moon, as soon as the night opens its arms, Stepan's shadow returns to the banks of the Dnieper. He is looking not only for traitors, but also for Maria, his only love, so that perhaps in the world of shadows he can find what was taken from the world of the living. And the village, cursed by his words, suffers every year from an invisible dark hand that lays down on the fields, dries up bread and darkens life. People believe that the only way to lift the curse is to find old scrolls with Stephen's last poems, which carry his pain and sorrow. Perhaps those poems will open the way to peace and tranquility for the forgotten poet. Now Oksana, who accidentally found one of the scrolls, knows that she was chosen to reveal a terrible secret, and a long and dangerous path awaits her to close the dark gates of the past once and for all. Path under the moon. Oksana knew that her touch to the scroll had linked her fate with the forgotten poet. Old people whispered that there was a place on the outskirts of the village where echoes of the past lived among the shadows. Those were the ruins of an old church, forgotten just like the history of Stepan. Once upon a time, people gathered there to beg for forgiveness and protection from spirits, but it has been a long time since a living soul set foot on those abandoned lands. Grabbing the scroll and saying goodbye to her family, Oksana leaves under the cover of night, when the moon fills the valley with ghostly light. She walks through the fog that covers the ground, and it seems that the very nature around her is frozen in silence. On the approach to the ruins, she hears soft whispers, as if the very walls of the old church are telling their story. Inside, she is greeted by uneasy silence, but soon she sees the moon breaking through the broken windows and illuminating the ancient altar. There lies another scroll, older and more worn, as if it had been unfolded many times by his hands, which have long since turned to dust. She carefully opens it and begins to read. These are the words of the oath that Stepan uttered before his death, touching and bitter, they reveal an even deeper level of his pain. Suddenly, Oksana feels a gust of wind blowing through the ruins, and a ghostly figure appears behind her. It is the shadow of Stepan himself, reaching out to her. His eyes burn with longing and pleading, and she realizes that in order to free his soul, an ancient rite must be completed, by which forgotten loves and hatreds will forever release the spirit into eternal rest. But the rite required the highest sacrifice. It had to be performed by the very person who never cheated and whose heart remained pure. Oksana understands that it is she who is called to this step, because her touch with the poems awakened the shadow to a new life. Now Oksana must choose whether to complete the rite and save the village from the curse by taking on the pain of the forgotten poet, or run away, leaving Stepan's shadow to wander for eternity. Oath of blood and tears. In front of Oksana, in the light of the moon, a difficult truth appears. you can free the spirit of the forgotten poet only at the price of your own purity and faith. An old oath, hidden in words, demands a sacrifice that will unite the worlds of the living and the dead, breaking the chains of hatred that restrain Stepan's spirit. The rite is called the Oath of Blood and Tears. Looking into the ghost's eyes, Oksana hears a faint voice, like the breath of time. My soul is doomed to wander until a heart is found that will bear my sorrow and pain, restoring my peace. Are you ready? Stepan whispers. She feels her heart clench with fear, but deep down, determination awakens. She understands that the poet's curse is not just revenge, but the cry of a soul lost between worlds. In response, clutching the scroll in her hands, Oksana says, I'm ready. She unrolls the scroll and reads the ancient words that echo in the silence. With each line, Oksana feels an invisible burden shifting to her: pain, sorrow, indescribable longing, and the curse of blood that runs through the generations. Suddenly, tears flow from her eyes, mixing with the earth at her feet, and she utters the last words of the rite, offering her purity to the sacrificial altar. Stepan's shadow begins to dissolve, and his eyes are illuminated with peace for the first time in all these years. In a dark whisper he says, "Thank you, daughter of a pure soul. You lifted my curse. Rest in peace." With the last words, the spirit slowly disappears, dissolving in the moonlight. Oksana remains alone, but with a sense of relief, as if the past sins that restrained the poet's soul left this place with him. And when the first rays of the sun make their way over the horizon, she sees how the fog that has covered the village for a long time begins to dissipate, revealing a clear sky. People from the village, having heard about Oksana's feat, are now gathering at the site of the old church. They bring flowers and lamps, honoring the memory of the poet who found peace. From now on, every year on the day of his death, they will remember his tragic story, which ended thanks to the courage of one girl. Oksana, having felt the heavy price of the sacrifice, understands, her life has been changed forever, and the burden of the poet's memory will now be her personal history. She returns home with a wisdom that rarely anyone can fathom, a memory of ancient love, betrayal, and the power of a pure soul capable of defeating even death.